Well, welcome to the Sales Scholars Podcast, where we talk to academic experts about anything and everything sales related. Well, for this episode, we're welcoming to the show Randy Webb, Senior Professor of Practice and Executive Director for the Steven Stagner Sales Excellence Institute at the University of Houston. Now, Randy's been a professor for 20 years now, specializing in sales leadership with both undergraduates and graduates. And Randy also has a background in business as a sales leader, and his most recent role prior to joining the university was as president of Uncle Ben's Inc., a division of Mars Incorporated.
Well, hey, Randy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Craig. I'm excited to be here as well.
Yeah, it's I know as we've talked about this and we talk about the world of academics and selling, you've got a long and illustrious career, I think now in both, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Yeah. So, hey, why don't you, I always like to start out with folks I have on the show of talking about how in the world they got into the academic world.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I always had a dream, if you will, after I finished my business career to be able to teach, and I always wanted to teach at the college level. And so I would have probably delayed my business career a little more than I ended up doing, but I ended up taking early retirement from Mars. I was the president and CEO of our food business, Uncle Ben's. And so it gave me an opportunity to take early retirement. I went back to school at U of H and went through the executive MBA program because I wanted to teach at that level. And I felt like to be credible, I had to have the degree I was teaching. So I actually went back to school at the ripe old age of 50 and then got my MBA and started teaching, and I've been teaching ever since.
Okay, so going back to school I like how you said the ripe old age of 50, there had to be, I would think, a little bit of, I don't know if nerves was the right word, or, that's a big change. Like how difficult was it to make that call?
The initial classes were a little challenging because your brain doesn't think that way. And especially going from a business career, going at 100 miles an hour every day, and all of a sudden having to step back and be more reflective about what you're hearing and what you're studying, and then be able to actually turn that into something and participate in class and write papers and do case studies and those kind of things. So it makes your brain work in a different way. So I had to get a little used to that. Once I got into the rhythm of it, I actually found that I found it stimulating. I enjoyed it. I like being a student and learning, so I saw it as a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I know for somebody who gets to work with you, your experience that you had in your time in your different roles in the different companies you've worked for, I've heard you talk about those things in the classroom, and I know it connects really, really well with students, and it likely in a lot of the things you teach, I would imagine, brings concepts to life.
Well, it does. I'm a storyteller when I teach, and I teach by the Socratic method, which means I ask a lot of questions. And so feedback I get from students more than not is the stories help reinforce what they're actually learning academically in the classroom. And what amazes me is after all these years, some of these stories now are getting a little age on them. And what amazes me is how we can still make them relevant for today and for today's students.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know what? It's funny. I thought the real reason that students loved some of what you did is because you always have M&Ms in your office available for them.
Well, that's true too. Bribery always works a little bit with a student, especially they're always hungry. So M&Ms doesn't hurt.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. I've heard some of the stories, and certainly your business experience. I see it show itself at work all the time, which is really helpful. Look, I know that one of your areas of expertise is sales leadership, from not only what your past career, but even what you teach at the university, and even you teach at the graduate level. So I'm curious that what you've seen in as some of the current changes in the marketplace that are really requiring sales leaders to adjust.
I think in thinking about this, I think there's really four things. There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot of noise in this area. But I really think for me, it gets down to four things. One is the move to inside sales. Inside sales is growing at a 15-time greater rate than outside sales. So when you're growing 15 times faster, in that area. They project that there were 750,000 inside sales jobs added just last year.
Wow.
And now with COVID, that's accelerating even more. We have partners that have resisted inside sales for forever. And now all of a sudden, everyone they have is in inside sales because of COVID. And so now, even after COVID, we think that what's going to happen is they're going to go and keep a piece of that inside sales group that they've actually had to form because of COVID. There's a guy that did a great article that works for Dial Source. He's a VP of marketing, guy named Tim Harris, who actually has a really good article on inside sales and what the trends are and why those trends are happening. So I think that's number one. Number two, technology is really driving a big difference and a big change in how a sales leader does their job. If you take a look at what's happening with digital selling and pipeline management, CRM, all those type of things, then coming down the pike, one of the reasons we actually hired the new tenured professor is because of his expertise in the area of artificial intelligence in sales, his expertise in digital selling, his expertise in sales analytics. And so we think that technology is really changing and will continue to change the sales leader's job going forward. I think the third thing is, and you might find this a little unusual, is this year in 2020, 50% of the workforce are now millennials.
Wow.
And I figured it out the other day. I've taught over 2,000 millennials since I've been teaching, which are a lot of millennials. And millennials, I think, are changing the way that you have to lead and manage as a sales leader, because Deloitte did some research a couple of years ago and said that 2/3 of millennials said that they were going to change jobs in the next 5 years.
Okay. So they're already planning on changes.
So they're already planning on changing. So can you imagine being a sales leader and you've got that in the back of your head, and then how do you keep them motivated? How do you let them make a difference? All those things that are important to millennials. And they're also not afraid to ask why. So most leaders, especially of my generation, always took that as you're challenging our authority. That's really not what they're doing. What they really truly are trying to understand, because they want to constantly learn, they want to constantly develop. So I think how you manage those millennials is going to have to change. And fourth, and maybe probably the biggest impact in terms of from a business standpoint, is I think the customers are changing. They're getting smarter because of all the technology and all the access they have to data and the analytics that they have now to operate their business. I think that as a result of that, they've become more demanding. And while I think relationships will always still be important between sales leaders and customers, I think that they're looking for value today. And so that means that a sales leader really has to coach their people more and teach their people how to sell value. That's even more important than before. It's always been important, but now, because those customers have so much information, they have to go in and help those customers solve real business problems, or they're not going to be successful. Yeah, so I think those four things are really going to drive the way sales leaders have to lead going forward.
Yeah, those are four great areas. In fact, I'm thinking about all of them. Like, wow, those are areas that certainly as a sales leader you pay attention to, but that such massive change going on right now. You know, you made the comment of teaching almost 2,000 millennials, a lot of millennials. And your observation around the fact that when they ask why is that they want to learn. Mm-hmm. And you know, if I'm a sales leader working with a bunch of millennials, mm-hmm. what type of advice would you give me to where I could most effectively lead this group?
It's funny that you ask. I've got an email here from one of our sales leaders from one of our major partners just this past week. And my advice to him is that, first of all, you have to be very structured in terms of your expectations. They have to really understand what your expectations are and how they're going to be measured and how they're going to be rewarded. You also need to be more transparent with millennials. Because they're going to ask you why, so you might as well be transparent and explain it to them in the first place. Why did you make the decision that you made? Why are we going in this direction as a sales organization or as a company? You might as well take the time to do that. The other thing is they want constant feedback. Now, the good news is about millennials is, contrary to a little bit of what he said here, is that they like direct feedback. You can give them direct feedback. They thrive on that. In fact, they'll pester you to death, constantly asking how they're doing. Okay. And so you need to make sure that you're prepared to give them that feedback. And then the last thing that I advised him to do is you've got to lay out a clear career path for them, because they will leave in a heartbeat. And the reason they leave is because they feel unappreciated. They don't feel like they're being allowed to make a big enough difference, and they don't see where their career is going. Well, a direct manager of a millennial has, that they're responsible for all those things. And so there's not any reason why you can't share that with those millennials, because I've got it a little bit later, but boredom is your enemy when it comes to a millennial. You got to understand, they are used to instant information. They're used to 15-second commercials on television if they watch TV. Yeah. They're used to Netflix and having things on demand. They want things now. Okay. And that's why so many of them leave after a short amount of time. And it just, can frustrate the crap out of you.
Yeah.
So,
it almost seems counterintuitive when you make the point that millennials are going to leave jobs more quickly. Like they're planning on leaving their jobs, you mentioned, but then they also want a career path that they can have an understanding of. How do you reconcile those two things, or they make sense?
Well, if you think about it, the reason they leave is because they don't think they have a clear career path.
I got you.
Okay, so you need to you're much better off laying that out for them to say, and then give them some time frames. They have unrealistic expectations of when they're going to become a vice president. They want to be a VP in 2 years. Well, that's not feasible. So lay out that career plan and say, or that career path and say, look, your expectation, if you want to get to be a VP someday, you're looking 10 years out. Instead of saying, well, okay, your expectation is you do a really good job, we're going to promote you in a year, and you're just going to move every year. That's not realistic.
Yeah, you're like, no, it doesn't quite work that way. Well, I do appreciate the fact you pointed out one of the key things with communicating with millennials is be clear on expectations.
Absolutely.
And so, we obviously, you see a ton of them moving through the university system. I mean, now we're on to the next generation. But but if I recall, the oldest millennials right now are right around 35, 36 years old.
Yes.
And right. So they're at that stage where
30s.
they're likely shifting into some more leadership positions in the companies. I always laugh a little bit when people are like, those darn millennials, and whatever, fill in the blank after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Your statistic is pretty shocking that, hey, it's 50% of the work population. So I'm like, guess what? You could say darn millennials all you want, but they're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere, and they're the largest generation in history.
Yeah.
There are over 80 million millennials, and so in the United States. So you're not going to get away from them. You can't hide from them, and they're going to continue to change the way business is conducted and the way people communicate. They're going to drive it.
Yeah. Hey, out of curiosity, how do millennials think about working like on teams or in a team-based type of environment?
They actually like teams. One of the knocks on millennials is everybody gets a trophy, because when they were coming up and they were doing sports as kids and those kind of things, everybody on the team got a trophy and all the rest. The reason that's important to them is it's not that they're not competitive or they don't want individual recognition. They do. But the team is important to them. And so if they played as a team, then they feel like everybody on the team should be recognized. Yeah. That's why when people recruit millennials, okay, if they have a bad interview with a recruiter, they're going to tell every friend they've got, and you just lost a pretty large pool of candidates because they believe they weren't treated well, or that you didn't follow up with them, and those type of things. So the team and the group is important to them. So they're actually pretty good team players.
Gotcha. No, that's good. That's good to know. I think, especially in today's business world, where it seems like so much more of what's happening is in the context of teams. Like you talked
Mhm.
about the, buying groups. There's more people involved in a buying decision.
Mhm.
There's selling teams, calling on larger accounts in different industries. So that team
Right.
concept seems to be a big one. With all the changes we talked about from a leadership standpoint, that you had mentioned earlier, these big changes going on.
Mhm.
Have you seen any particular best practices when you look at sales leaders related to developing stronger teams?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a laundry list, but I think when I boil it down to about three. And I think it starts with hiring the best people and the right people. Because if you don't get that right, then it haunts you forever. And in this day and time, it's very difficult to make changes with people. So you want to do the best job you can at the get go. So I think the best practices I'm seeing of good sales leaders, they take the time they need to make sure they're getting the best people they can.
Gotcha.
Okay. The second thing is that I see in terms of the best practices, especially now that we've talked about millennials and they're becoming such a bigger part of the sales force, is you need to coach instead of supervise. So coaching is becoming more important in terms of making your people better. The I think that one of the things that you need to coach on and uh, is a study done on coaching and the impact it has on the business. And it said that with effective coaching, okay, people that know how to coach and do a really good job coaching their salespeople, they saw a 17% increase in sales.
Okay.
So that ought to give you enough incentive right there just to be a better coach.
Yeah.
Also, you need to not just coach, but I think you need to, as part of that coaching, teach critical thinking skills so that these people can learn to think on their own because you're not going to be with them all the time. And so they need to learn teaching good critical thinking skills where they can think on their feet, especially in front of a customer, and be able to adapt. In our sales program, we teach adaptive selling, and that requires critical thinking skills right there on the spot to be able to adapt to what that buyer is saying or that customer is saying. So that comes with good coaching. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is when they call you with a problem, whether a customer problem or whatever, I think the best thing or the best way to respond is to say, well, what do you think we should do?
Yeah.
How do you think we should handle this?
It's like a good attorney, answer a question with a question.
Absolutely. Make them think. Okay. That'll be the greatest gift you can give your sales organization is to have good critical thinkers that can adapt to various situations because God knows right now you've got to be flexible with everything that's happened just this year and what we've been up against.
I feel like
But
the adaptability thing is one of those where intellectually people will say yes, it's important,
mhm,
but then practically applying it sometimes can be big challenges. Because the one thing I've noticed about adaptive selling
mhm.
is it can be a painful process.
Oh, can be very painful.
Salespeople who don't know how to do things, they're trying things and it's not working, and then they're coming back and getting coaching. But then the most important part, well, then they have to go try it again. And it's
Mhm.
like, get on the bike, fall down, get back on the bike, fall down. It's painful. And it seems like organizations will often not be patient enough in allowing their sales teams to develop those critical thinking skills.
And that's why I think that you've got to look at it as coaching. And good training and good coaching makes all the difference for your sales organization.
Yeah.
They'll feel better. You'll have less turnover. You'll do a better job with your customer. The morale will be higher. They will just feel because you care about them. Coaching shows and training somebody shows that you care about them, and that's really important. And you mentioned the Z's coming up behind the millennials. We're teaching those now, and you got to remember they had helicopter parents. They were hovered over. Okay. So this idea of coaching and critical thinking, they never had to do any of that. So you've really got to this day and time, if you're going to be a great sales leader, you've got to be a good coach.
Yeah.
I think the third thing is that you've got to empower decision making, which goes along with that. If you teach them the critical thinking skills, you've got to let them use them. And so I think that means you empower decision making. In my experience, I found that if I wanted more power, the best way to get more power from my people was to give it away, give it to them.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to have to empower decision making more so than directing people. I think the days of giving people direction, telling them what to do, how to do it, when to do it, I think those days are over. I don't think the current generation will put up with it, number one. And number two, they want to learn. And if you're telling them what to do and how to do it, when to do it, they're not learning. And so I think that in terms of a best practice, I think it's those three things. Do a good job hiring the best people you can find, then coach and train them. And then third, empower them to make some decisions after you've coached them.
Well, I'm curious what you would tell the sales leader who says, "Hey, Randy, I empower my salespeople, but they don't respond very well." What would you tell them?
That's because you haven't done a good job teaching them how to do it.
Okay. So
If
it's
you
more
can't
than
give,
just
you
saying,
cannot
"Go do
give,
it."
yeah, I don't believe you give somebody the authority to go out and call on a customer, for example. And let's say you put somebody in a major customer, and then you've never taken the time to train or coach them on how to call on a major customer. That is just a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So if I have a sales leader say to me, I gave Johnny an opportunity to call in this bigger customer and they failed. My first question is, what did you do to help Johnny be successful?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the, you got to first teach them before you empower them or let them go do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the great things I loved about Mars was, and this wasn't the case at Dial when I worked at Dial when I started my career. When I was a VP of sales at the candy company and at M&M Mars, when I first started working for Mars before I became president of Uncle Ben's, one of the great things I learned from the Mars family was that it's okay to try and fail. That the sin is not trying.
That's a powerful lesson.
And I think that's what we do. You mentioned a word earlier that I think is important. And as leaders, we have to be patient with our salespeople. They don't have our experience. They don't know what we know. Our job is to help get them there. That means that they give them opportunities to try and realize that there will be times when they fail. And then many times they learn more from the failure than they do from being successful. And then you pick them back up again and try it again. And that was a great lesson that I learned at Mars, is that you got in trouble for not trying, not for trying and failing.
Yeah, I see that played out in organizations. Sometimes it's just the right thing to say. Failure is okay, but then sometimes organizations don't actually allow it to happen. But those that do, you find they're achieving greater success, and their people are developing much more to be able to do the things inside of the business that you want them to do.
Sure. In my career at Mars, I failed a number of times. The reaction from the owners was always the same. Tell me what you learned.
Yeah.
What did you learn? Tell me what you learned. And as long as you learn something, then they would never bring it up again. It was okay. You tried, you failed, you learned from it. Now you'll know what to do better next time.
What would you say was, like, if you reflect back on that time in your career, what was one of those big points of, I'll call it big points of learning, that it didn't work out so well, but you learned something? What was one that you recall?
Well, let's see. When I became president of Uncle Ben's, I looked at our prepared rice business. I'd been there about 6 months, and realized that Lipton and Rice-A-Roni were killing me in my prepared rices. and the flavored rices. And I looked at it and I said, well, they were selling it below my cost. So how in the world could they do that? And what they were doing is they had a noodle and sauce product that they also had in the market that we did not have at Uncle Ben's. And they were diverting money from that to the rice business to go kill me in the prepared rice business because I owned the prepared rice business. And so to gain market share, they were lowering the price. So I said, well, I'll beat them at their own game. I had noodles and Uncle Ben's noodles and sauce in Canada, and I said, I'll just bring it down to the United States. I brought down 4 items, decided to launch it nationally, and over the objections of my 7 vice presidents and everybody else in the business said it's a mistake. Do not go national. It's too expensive. And it cost us about $50 million to go national between advertising, trade promotion, consumer promotion, and all that, not including logistics, manufacturing costs, and all the rest. And so I did it anyway. And after 3 months, I looked like a bona fide genius. And we were getting record trial. And all that taught me was if you give a big enough coupon to an American consumer, they'll try anything once. But it takes about 9 months to find out if you get enough customers coming back into the franchise to make it viable. At 9 months, it was painfully obvious to me and everybody else that we didn't have enough repeat business to make it a long-term viable product without continuing to spend a lot of money on marketing. So I made the decision to pull the plug after 9 months. When I made that decision and the dust settled, it cost the business $25 million in losses. I lost $25 million on that venture.
Whew.
So I get a call from John Mars, and John says, Randy, I'm coming to Houston in 2 weeks, and I want to see what you learn. And the reason for my coming is because I want to see what you learned from my $25 million investment in your education.
That'll get your attention.
That'll make you pucker a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he came in and he said, okay, tell me, we didn't even get out of the airport. He said, what'd you learn? And I said, I learned I will never go national with another product in the United States without putting it in test market. And he said, well, I'm not sure that's worth $25 million, but at least you learned something. And then he never brought it up again. And his brother never brought it up, and his sister never brought it up to me. And I lost $25 million. Of course, he said, I expect you to make that $25 million up that you lost on your stupidity. But
you said, I'm gonna apply the learning. Yeah. And I'll try to pick up the $25 million somewhere else.
Exactly. So but isn't that pretty amazing? He comes in and the only purpose of his trip, he said, I want to see what you learn from it.
Yeah. That had to be both empowering, but then also at the same time convicting to make sure that you could point to something and said, this is what I learned.
Oh, absolutely. And so then I stood up in front of God and country and said, you guys were right, I was wrong. And I took the hit for it to say that I made a mistake. And here's what we've learned from it. We won't make that mistake again. Let's move on. My young program managers that work in the Institute, I usually give them a lot of freedom. And I tell them it's like I-10 going west out to Katy. You know, there's like 21 lanes or something right now of interstate highway. And I said, look, I'm gonna make sure you stay on the highway, but you have a lot of freedom to speed up, slow down, change lanes. Just don't get in the ditch. And my job is to help you not get in the ditch. Get off the road.
Look, Randy, we appreciate you coming on the show. I think the examples that you shared from not only what you're doing now at University of Houston, but also your past career, I think will be incredibly valuable to our listeners. I mean, sales leaders are under tremendous pressure today. I mean, we highlighted the fact of the number of things changing. And so those practical examples you provided were super helpful. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales Scholars.
Thanks for having me, Craig. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for the opportunity.